In most of life, in the corporate world, in our personal lives, in our sporting ambitions, we are trained to wait for permission. We wait for the title, the invitation, or the sign-off of the expert's blessing. My guest today, Dr. Christine Theodorovics, is the CEO of a large international insurance company and a lifelong mountaineer. And she is someone who has challenged this whole idea of waiting for permission. When she was younger, she learned the high cost of impatience when she stood beneath Huayna Potosí in the Bolivian Andes and thought, why don't I just do that now while I'm here? Well, suffice it to say, she failed spectacularly. The mountain drove her back with altitude illness. But that failure didn't crush her ambition. It taught her an important lesson that she needed to build competence one step at a time and not skip steps, and then give herself that permission to move forward. So over the next 2 decades, while leading insurance companies across Europe, Christina didn't ask for a new chance. She built her competence one step at a time. And with mountaineering, she systematically climbed all 48 of Switzerland's 4,000 meter peaks, one weekend at a time. She did a doctoral research project where she traveled around the world and interviewed climbing expedition leaders aged 39 to 89 and tried to understand what they knew about leadership and how to translate that into leadership in the business world. One of the things that she learned was that authority in the most dangerous and most stressful environments is not granted by a title. It is earned through what she calls qualified experiences. This sheds some truth on this old Alpine maxim: ability is the measure of permission. Think about that. Ability is the measure of permission. Her permission is one of meritocracy, responsibility, accountability, and hard work, and of not being afraid to take permission to define her own abilities and own her own accomplishments. It's a conversation about the difference between youthful ambition and earned ability. Christine will never talk about taking power. She talks about owning the process that gives her the permission to excel, not with peer approval, but with proof of self. I think this is a really important conversation because we explore the methods of building permission to excel that work both in a boardroom and in a bivouac. And this tells us and instructs us on knowing when and where you are able to fully stand in who you've become and own the permission to act from that place. My name is Steve House, and this is Voice of the Mountains. If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO. Welcome.
Hello, Steve. I'm really glad that you're having me for your super podcast.
No, thank you. You've said that in the end, you only see the summit, but it's the many small steps that get you there. Some people may hear that as something like a motivational platitude, but I think that you mean it as an operational philosophy. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think it's two things. One is, the summit is, you have to consider that, or I consider that as some sort of overarching goal, be it of a specific project or in your life. It's some visionary thing, it's the summit. And the many, many steps is the way how you get there. That means you need to make it operational, touchable, tangible, and then develop a plan how to do it. It's easy to say, I want to do that, but you don't basically put any flesh in the game and invest yourself. And so at the same time, it's, working out how to do it, but also investing yourself, meaning doing, taking all those steps with all the right efforts. And sometimes that's really tough. And it's easy to say, I would like to do that without actually operationally thinking about it. I think that's the crucial thing about about everything, be it on a mountain or being on any project you would like to realize.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's really hard to know what you don't know when you start climbing a mountain or starting a project, right? There's so much sort of ignorance, and I don't mean that in the sort of negative sense. I mean that in just the practical sense that there's a lot you don't know. You don't know how to climb a mountain
Well,
until you've climbed a few.
of course, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing about it. Otherwise, you would just take a plan and then you tick the boxes and the checklist and you just know what to expect. But that's nowhere there. I mean, be it in the corporate world or be it on the mountain, there's always some surprises coming around. So you should rather be surprised if there are no surprises. You know?
Yeah, of course. Take me back to your childhood and going to the Rax Mountains for the first time. Who are you there with? What are those mountains like? And what did those early memories feel like now?
Well, I really still love the Rax and the Schneeberg. It's my favorite mountains because it's this home Heimat feeling, yeah. And
Mhm.
my mother, she used to come from the Austrian mountains. She come from Semmering, which you might know. It's in Styria. So she always took us to the Rax and the Schneeberg also to go skiing and so on, but also to go hiking because it was basically where she was from. So I was exposed quite early to an area mountain environment. And I also have a small anecdote which comes to my mind. You might know Viktor Frankl, the very
Of
famous
course.
Austrian psychologist and psychiatrist. And he was an avid fan and lover of the Rax. He was there every single weekend and climbing, and then afterwards he was helping out in one of the huts as a waiter to help the mountain hut tenors there. And the thing is, he used to be at the Otto House, which is the major hut, the bigger hut on the Rax. And when I was little, I was used to sit on his lap there,
Oh,
crawling around. And I wish my mother had taken a picture of him and me because I'm the biggest fan, obviously, of Viktor Frankl because he combines this psychological analysis with his mountaineering experiences. And he was a complete passionate alpinist. So I think that was something which it's a nice anecdote, but obviously I didn't know who he was when I was 3 years old. But this was the early, I think, imprinting as a childhood. It imprints you somehow that you have a feeling, a good feeling about something. And that was the mountains. And the thing is, when you're little, you do it with your parents. Then you become a teenager and you do everything else than what you did with your parents. So I went scuba diving, basketball playing, and horseback riding, but always far away from the mountains. Only skiing remained a common, thread through my life. And only during or after my studies, actually, I came back via really exotic travels in the Andes, as you mentioned before, to this taste of the mountains and the feeling that wherever I am in the entire world, as soon as I'm on a mountain, I somehow felt home because that's this early imprinting, whether you stand in the
mhm.
Andes or in the Himalaya or in Africa, as soon as you're in some mountain alpine environment, it feels somehow area or you feel comfortable. So that was a little bit the way. And I learned skiing there as well on the mini slopes with one T-bar till I was, I think, 14 years old. This is where I learned skiing. But I mean, I learned skiing with 3 years. So that was my home turf, so to say. Yeah.
That's an amazing story. I mean, and Viktor Frankl, for those of you listening that don't know him, he wrote this incredible book called Man's Search for Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
which recounts how he
Exactly.
survived the concentration camps during the Second World War. He's a Jewish psychiatrist from Vienna, kind of a contemporary of Freud's as well, like part of this like very rich kind of, has defined psychiatry worldwide since their time. It hasn't changed, I don't think, too much. And this book is something that I've probably read 15 times. It's one of
Yeah, I know.
there are a few books that I read every couple of years, just go back to and read again and read again. And that is one of them. And it's absolutely incredible if you haven't read it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
it'd be
have read
interesting to
it
try
many
to read it
times.
in the German. Maybe it would be different.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, you have described yourself as kind of having a youthful delusion when you were in La Paz and you went up to Huayna Potosí. Um, what was that delusion exactly, and what actually broke it?
Well, it was actually, I mean, it was predictable. We knew at the time, I mean, I was very young. I didn't even know anything about mountaineering. I didn't even know that, I mean, there was a big danger or high altitude sickness. I only knew we need to be acclimatized. And the thing was, I was backpacking at the time, and we were in Bolivia for 5 or 6 weeks. So I was well acclimatized because they're always above 4,000 meters. And when we wanted to climb this Huayna Potosí, which I thought is easy, no idea about anything, really super naive. And then I said, well, let's go. And then there was a snowstorm. And so they canceled the trip. And we already had booked a flight to the Amazonian part of Bolivia and spent a week there. Obviously, after a week in the Amazon basin of Bolivia, you're not acclimatized anymore. And then we came back and we naively thought, now we're going to make the tour. We had 3 days left. And, for obvious reasons, we completely failed, because when you come from zero and you fly into La Paz and the next day you run up to the base camp, I think was in 5,300 meters or something like that. That's substantial. So I failed to die there. I mean, I nearly died because I had these lips completely black, and also the fingernails, they were dark blue. And now I know I was really in danger. But at the time, I mean, I was 24 years old. I had no clue. There was no internet or there was no information.
Yeah.
So I'm happy I survived. But I also learned, how hard. I mean, it's really hard if you walk up. I mean, it was a long way up there, a long trek to go to the space camp. And but I really somehow got hooked, because I really liked, the atmosphere, this sleeping in the tent, although I was miserable. But I thought, why do I necessarily have to do that in the Andes? I could also start climbing in the Alps, and that was a little bit, the reintroduction to the mountains. And I climbed the rocks in the Schneeberg with my mom when I came back, actually, which was more adequate.
And you didn't get blue lips and black fingers.
Exactly.
Sounds like a lot more fun. And then you sort of created this project that you completed over 20 years of climbing the 4,000 meter summits in Switzerland.
Yeah.
That you did while, building your career for those couple of decades. Talk about that and that balance. Was every year the same? Were there years where you gave up some mountaineering because of what was going on professionally, or was it just, how did that work?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And the thing is, it wasn't actually a project at all. I just, I used to live in Munich at the time, and then I started climbing because it's close to Tyrol, and, from Vienna, it's far. So from Munich, I started climbing. I did all the courses, like how to behave on a glacier, jump in a crevasse, and did all this training. That was the end of the 90s. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I got an offer from a Swiss bank to work in Switzerland. I had no clue about banking, but they really wanted me, so they offered me a good job. And I said, well, okay, why not? It wasn't my plan to work in a bank really or in finance, but then there were the mountains, I mean, that's also an incentive if you offer the job so close to the mountains. And that was in 2000, I really started getting more into the, alpinism, because it's close. You can do it every weekend, and the 4,000 meters peaks are just there. And so I just started climbing guided tours or with some friends. And in the course of time, obviously you climb 4,000 meter peaks as well. And then you just continue. And I was there, I really continued every year. Not a lot, but steadily. I used to run marathon at the time, so I was always in a very good shape and never had any problems in terms of resilience or good condition. And again, this was 25 years ago, so it was easier. And so I always tried to keep some years a little bit less, some years a little bit more. And I think after maybe 10 years, I started getting into the more difficult 4,000 meter peaks, where I really needed also a guide one-to-one sometimes, and this guide at a certain point, he said, look, you've already done so many, you could do all. And I wasn't even aware of all. I wasn't even aware there were 48. And then he said, well, you only have to do 10 more or something like this. And then it became a project when I realized I could do them all. And I wasn't convinced at all, because I'm not a good climber. I'm passionate and I have a very good physical condition. I was very, resilient, but I'm not a good technical climber. Nothing compared to you or your peers. That's so far away, like you wouldn't even be able to say. But, I thought if this mountain guide has the impression I can do it, he is the expert. He can judge. I haven't been up there yet. So in the course of the time, it was really a project with this specific mountain guide because he could judge. And then so I just ticked off the boxes, which also was then funny because I had to do the Grand Combin 2 times because the first time I went only on the mid summit, and then I figured it counts for 3, so I had to go back and do the other 2 summits, and so it was a game also. So. And yes, I had to balance it a little bit with a job. But then again, if you live in Switzerland, you can do it in like a weekend. You do a 4,000 meter peak, you come back and you work again.
Yeah. I'm very curious to hear your impression of how we first met and that experience. I want to hear your story, and then I'll tell you my story.
In 2005?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really fantastic. So
what were you doing in Pakistan?
Yeah, I had this unique opportunity to go on this expedition trekking. It was a trekking expedition like with Reinhold Messner. And that was a very spontaneous decision because I was at the time training for the Ironman. And so I was in a super good shape, and I was really just finished the Ironman. And so I didn't plan anything for this summer because I was training all the time. And then a very good friend of mine said, look, there is a trip where I can sign up with Reinhold Messner. It's really tough. It's an expedition like in Pakistan. I cannot go. Do you want to go? And I said, well, Reinhold Messner, I mean, he's an idol. My mother already went there when I was a kid. And I said, well, can you just sign up there? And she said, yeah. So I just signed up 2 weeks before. And I just went. It was like completely out of the blue. And it was a fantastic trip because it was surrounding the Nanga Parbat. And I went with Reinhold Messner with my book about Nanga Parbat written by him in my hand, and I was like, what were you referring on this page to and so on. And he was telling all his stories and everything. So it was a fantastic experience for a passionate alpinist. And I also like alpine history. I really like all those stories and so on. So we did this trekking around Nanga Parbat, and actually we wanted to climb the Diamir Roy, which is a 6,000 meter peak. And the thing is, we didn't because we found this shoe of the brother of Reinhold in this expedition. So that was another alpine historic moment. I mean, in all the books you can read, you read about it, and I was there when we found this book. It's now in the museum. And obviously, what topped everything is we met a young U.S. mountaineer called Steve House, and sitting in his camp at the Rupal face. And then, everybody said, oh, those are 2 aspiring young alpinists, but they are fantastic. And they will try to climb the Rupal face. And this is what Reinhold Messner with his brother did, for all the people who might not know the story, where the brother then afterwards died. So this is all historic. And there you were sitting with Vince Anderson, trying to get some tips also from Reinhold, because he did the same trip in 1970, and that was in 2005. So this is how we met. And I thought that was really fantastic. And then we came back to Europe. And 1 or 2 weeks after we came back, I read in the newspaper, there was this was the super, super highlighted news that the 2 of you made it in alpine style to the top of Nanga Parbat. And it was just so surreal that we met before, and then I read everywhere. And so that was a fantastic, all those coincidences you couldn't plan, So it was fantastic.
Of course. Yeah, and we had no idea that you guys were coming or that you were there. It was just like, all of a sudden one day, like we're in our rest period just waiting for the weather. It was end of August. Yeah. And I just sort of look up and, trekkers pass through there, and here come some trekkers, and, it's sort of, you're in the meadow and people usually camp around the same place because there's the spring water and so on, like no big deal. And then like one of the trekkers, I really remember like looking up and like looking down and thinking like, wait, that's Reinhold Messner. Like, like looking up again and being like, he looked at me, and I must have just had this like complete, just sort of, what? Like I couldn't believe, like, how is it that Reinhold Messner, is this a dream? Like we're at the bottom of the Rupal face trying to climb this thing and Reinhold is here? I can't believe it. And then we ended up hanging out, and you and I talked a bunch, and we talked to Reinhold a lot, and like, my memory of Reinhold was like we're trying to get tips and he wouldn't. It felt to us like he wasn't telling us anything. It's like we were like trying to pull something useful out of him, and
But it
he
was
was just like,
35 years before.
yeah, of
He
course, of
might
course.
not have had all the details anymore.
Yeah, and he climbed a completely different route, and everything is different. So what can you say? Now I completely understand that, but at the time I was just like, come on, give us some information.
But that was
But
fantastic.
one thing he told us that we did is he said he told us about how when he went down on the other side after he lost Gunther and then he walked out that
Yeah.
he had a hard time getting help and he didn't have
Yes.
any money. And so
No.
we actually put a bunch, like, I don't know, several $100 worth of Pakistani rupees in a plastic bag and put it in the bottom of our backpack in case we ended up on the other side. We would be able to like hire a Jeep or whatever to come back around. So we did make one equipment adjustment. Yeah. We ended up coming back down the same side down Reinhold's route, but that's another story. That's so funny. Yeah, that was really fun, and it was the only time really where we had a trekking group that sort of interacted with us. I mean, we had at least one or maybe two couple of meals together or something, and we really we talked to a lot of your expedition members, and it was really fun.
Yeah, but there weren't a lot of groups around. I don't remember we met many people on this trek because it was really, we went with local peoples to find also the trail, because sometimes there was no trail. And I remember at a certain point there was an avalanche, like a mud avalanche, which covered the complete trail, and so we had to walk around 2 days. So it was really expedition-like. It was, I loved it. It was so remote. There was nothing. I mean, it was really nice.
Not too many people do the circumnavigation of that mountain.
No, not at all. That's why it was so interesting. Yeah, it is huge. And the Mazzenola obviously is really high. So, and you cannot not go, because then you have to go back, and it's the point of no return. So it was really expedition-like. We felt like being on a real expedition.
So if we connecting back to expeditions, I want to talk about your doctoral research and the interviews you did. And I mentioned them before, but one of these guys was almost 100 years old. What did they tell you about the moments that changed them, the near misses, the losses, the decisions that they had to make that they can't forget? Were there specific stories or something that surprised you?
There are a lot of stories. I have all in all, I interviewed 13 people over 2 or 3 years, and the rest was all the analysis, and it took so long because I worked. I always took breaks of 2 years, and then I got myself back again in the analysis and everything. But I have 333 pages of transcripts. So it's really 13 interviews. So it's a lot. I mean, to boil it down, it's difficult. But the thing is, what I was most not astonished but surprised is that the underlying theme of everybody and leadership and all the accounts was really this human aspect. There was no regrets about not having done an expedition, not having reached the summit. It was all the human-related experiences and the human-related aspects which touched people, really, be it dramatic things or be it bonding with people and having experiences together in a positive way. And it actually boiled down to that. It's the human aspect, and that was quite surprising in the sense that if you think about corporate management or leadership and expedition guys, they're really tough mountaineers, and then they go up in the ice and they survive catastrophes and so on. So you don't necessarily all of a sudden think about empathy and human aspects. Of course, you also do, but I wouldn't have immediately said that's the first thing I'm thinking about. But at the end of the day, it always came back to that. Be it in a conflict, be it in the bonding, be it in a positive surprise, it was always this human interaction which was in the center of all the accounts. And that's quite a lesson. Huh? I mean, at the end of the day, we are all human beings. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also fascinated by the kind of age range, because you had expedition leaders that were 97 and then some that one was 39, I believe. And the style of doing expeditions changed so much
Completely.
from 50 to 2000 and whenever
Yes.
the last one that you
Well,
expedition
the
was.
youngest one was actually Edurne Pasaran, the Spanish lady
Mhm.
now who climbed all the 8,000 meter peaks as a first lady. Oh yeah, and then the oldest was Norman Dierenfurt, and he at the time was 93. He's now passed away, but I was so lucky to get hold of him. He lived in Salzburg, and I was at the time working in Austria, so I went and saw him, and that was an extraordinary experience because he was still part of a different generation. I mean, he's the one who organized the first expedition, U.S. expedition on Everest.
Yeah.
In 1963, and he was awarded by John F. Kennedy a medal, which he had in his apartment, and with a picture of him and John F. Kennedy, plus the two Sherpas, which he brought along. And that's also a leadership thing. He brought along the Sherpas to receive the medals from the US president. And there was also a nice anecdote. He said they nearly got attacked by the bodyguards because, they had these scarves which they put on your, on your neck in Nepal. So they brought it. They wanted to put it on John F. Kennedy's, and the bodyguards were ready to jump at them and put them down because you cannot touch the U.S. president. So I mean, to talk to somebody like that, he was teaching Marilyn Monroe in Hollywood because he was a photography and film teacher before. So, I mean, those are things where it's a different sphere, it's a different... And then Edurne, I mean, she is like our age, I mean, she's our generation, and you met her, and she's like contemporary. So that was the time period. I also wanted to have a long time period because the style of the expeditions fundamentally changed in this time period, plus during the time period at the end, the commercial expeditions were also introduced. So I made sure I also talked to some of the commercial expedition leaders, which are completely different than, obviously, the expedition leaders which were working or climbing with professionals or experts, for that matter. So yes, it was a large range of people. But it was hard to find women, I have to say. I didn't interview a lot of women.
Yeah. And well, I mean, this Voice of the Mountains, I also struggle with that, like to find, it's not balanced. And part of that's a reflection of who are my friends. I have more male friends than female friends. It's also a reflection of the topic of the season, which is, business. And then the mountains, and all of those things, it sort of seems to select pretty male heavy. Was there a moment when someone told you something in those interviews that changed how you see yourself or how you see leadership?
Well, I think it was a lot what I mentioned before, this human factor. I mean, one of the things which I thought was really, one of the most reflected persons was Sir Chris Bonington. I mean, was he still alive? But when I interviewed him, and his book, one of his books, was the reasons I had this idea for the thesis. Because he was so reflected about leadership. I mean, he's one of the few expedition leaders who invested himself to improve as a leader, to improve his leadership skills, and afterwards really reflected on everything which happened, wrote many books about it. And thus, when I read one of those books, he inspired me to write this thesis, which I did really for pure joy, because the title or the subject did not necessarily do anything positive to my career or anything. It was really a combination of something I wanted to accomplish, and I'm very interested in leadership, and as an alpinist, so I thought the match was good. But Sir Chris Bonington, when I interviewed him, he was really convinced that you need to invest a lot of time to bond the team. And he had many examples where he didn't invest himself, or where, for example, for practical reasons, in the trekking towards the base camp, which at the time took many, many weeks, and not like now. So usually we're going in one group. Sometimes these groups split up in two, and he might hang out with one group more than with the other group. When they arrived at base camp, there was a complete asymmetry in the relationship he has built up, and thus the team itself didn't bond really well. That is very blunt, maybe, if you want to look it from external and say, well, that's true, that can happen, but that's not bad, that's not so dramatic. But yes, it was. At the end of the day, it took a lot of effort in the other team, for example, for him as a leader, to make up again and then to bring them together. And the more he invested in the base camp time, the less issues he had afterwards, when they went to the high camps and they had the walkie-talkies at the time, because then you cannot have a lot of conversations anymore or discuss things because you're very limited in your time and you're way out to, you have a space of, 5 minutes every day at 4 and then you call yourself. So I think that was extremely interesting on how much to build this team and to bond this team should be invested to make sure that afterwards they work. And the interesting thing is when I finalized the thesis, I actually introduced a chapter on remote meetings because it was during COVID. And at the time, all these Teams calls came up and they completely substituted any human interaction in real because of COVID. And I thought that was really a lesson learned because you cannot, even though we do substitute meetings with team meetings, and that makes a lot of sense in terms of, saving time and money, but you cannot completely substitute it. You need to invest in the team. Once a team knows each other and has a confidence level, you can do a lot via remote, but you cannot, by definition, substitute it from the very beginning because this confidence level and this trust is very hard to install if you don't spend time together, invest yourself. I thought that was one of the really interesting things which you can one-to-one relate and where many mistakes are happening in our corporate world because people think they're safe if they do not bring teams together. In reality, I think it's a very good idea to at least once a year or to make a new team get to know each other, invest 2 days somewhere, doesn't matter where, to get to know it, and then everything works nicely. That's one of those things where I thought, well, he has a point, and he has done it many times, and that you could translate really easily.
Mm-hmm. And he's done it from, his early expeditions in the early 60s that were massive, like his early, he was leader of the early, like some of these early British Everest climbs from the south side, and they climbed the southwest face. And then later on in the 70s and 80s, they were going as teams of 4 to the Himalaya and doing things. So he lived through this incredible span. Yes. I've been trying to get him to come on this podcast, but I think he's not doing interviews at the moment. So hopefully I can find a way to convince him.
I was lucky, when I was referred to him, and I remember so well, he was very strict. He said, okay, you can come and interview me, but make sure you have read all my books before. And he was right. I mean, he wrote so many books, and he didn't want me to waste his time to ask exactly the same questions which he had already answered in the book. So I was really reading all his books and then referring to certain things there, which I thought was a valid ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I got to spend a lot of time. And initially we had 45 minutes. I was there 2 hours with him. So he was really, really very nice and very eloquent in his sayings. It was one of the most interesting interviews I had. Yeah.
I can imagine. What an incredible guy. I've had the chance to meet him a few times. So you found that this idea, one of the ideas that you kind of elaborated on in your thesis, was that how expedition leadership, as we've observed a few times, has evolved from this hierarchical command towards sort of a small, agile team with more distributed leadership. And you talk about emotional intelligence taking precedent over things like positional authority. That's, I think a lot of small companies or startup companies, they think in those terms, but at the corporate level, at least the people I know that work in places like Cisco or other big corporations, Walmart, they're not really operate. They're trying to operate that way, but they really struggle to. How does that affect how you lead, both in the group Helvetia Balois, and your CEO role for the three countries, Italy, Austria, and Luxembourg.
Yeah, it's a very important point you're making here. I mean, there have been many tries, also in the corporate work to incorporate a little bit more, agile leadership styles or be leaner, approachable, and so on. And I think a lot of things have changed. There are less hierarchies, there are less formalities than many years ago. Not everywhere, but that you can really, change. And it's also society which changes. But a complete these agile teams with no authority, with little authority, which just auto-manage themselves. We have tried it in different organizations where I've been working. The problem is also with the startups. It works till the startups gain a certain size. Usually a startup consists of a couple of people, like 3 founders and with some programmers or whatever. Then they're successful, they grow, and usually at the size of, it's around 60 people, something like that. You need, at the very latest, usually with 30 it starts, but 60 you need structures, because otherwise it gets completely chaotic, anarchical, and you waste time and resources, really. And even if you have still the same goal, you already need some sort of governance. Who is signing what? Who is deciding what? Otherwise, it doesn't work. Now, in a big company, the thing is, usually, why doesn't it work? And I'm convinced that you still need a certain authority and you need hierarchies. It's just easier. And then it's the question how you live that. But the thing is, if you have a self-organizing team, the authority might be shared, but the accountability never is. At the end of the day, somebody puts the head there. Usually it's then at the top, it's the CEO, but it's the head of the department. Somebody is there. You cannot, the accountability, it's somebody who's embracing it. He knows or she knows what she has to do. The team accountability, very difficult to enforce. The decision is for everybody. The ownership gets very blurry. And when the things go wrong, not when the things go good, you always say the success has many mothers, huh? Then nobody feels responsible. So who do you go to? And the managers themselves, they don't intervene because they delegated the authority. So nobody is responsible. So what's happening? Nothing. Huh? So that's the one thing. So the result is slow decisions, turning in circles, risk avoidance, finger pointing, and so on. So that's one thing. It's very difficult to be accountable. The other thing is it's really the role ambiguity, and that creates a little bit like silent power struggles. No, if you're not key on your role and everybody does everything, then people want to show off. They want to be, you still want the salary rise or do something else one day. So you need to, so you have these silent power struggles. People don't know who decides what. Then they pretend they did something which they didn't, So informal hierarchies then emerge. Because at the end of the day, that's very lot. There's a group, there's always some silent leader or the most experienced person or the most outspoken. So informally it emerges, but it doesn't exist in reality. So you have those hierarchies, and then you have conflicts which are not outspoken, but they go underground because we are all in the same, it's like we all love each other. But then again, there's a conflict, but we are not allowed to have one. So that's also difficult. And the third point is, the managers of today, they're simply not trained for it. You can try it, but then at the end, how do you live all that? If you're in a big organization, at the end of the day, it's your head, if it doesn't, how do you handle all that? In our organizations, that's very, very, very difficult. And the last thing is it always assumes this trust level, sometimes companies say like, we are family and so on. Well, that's not really true, because in a family you don't get fired, and in a company that can happen. It's not an NGO, it's not some cozy environment. It can be cozy and nice, but it can also be really tough. And then if you have no accountability and no structures, and everybody is just floating around, it's very hard. And at the end of the day, you have meritocracy, you have a consequent management. At least if you are performance related. company, and you don't do yourself something well, or also the team, because the decision making gets painfully slow and nothing happens. And that's also frustrating for people, because only consensus based doesn't work, So it's a stretch, but that doesn't mean that you cannot make an effort to change the culture. I mean, you can be less hierarchical, you can be very approachable as a CEO, and that's what I ask and what I do, because you can learn a lot. I mean, if I sit in the canteen and I talk to people on the table, or I have an apéro and I have a drink, I talk to everybody and you learn a lot. And I think that's a little bit more the way I would approach it, because what I also learned, the whole thing about freedom and empowerment, yes, you should give people empowerment, but you need to define the frame really well, because it's easy to say to somebody, just do it as you think because I empower you, but you don't give any guidelines. That's actually not fair, because you need to provide a frame, a very good frame, very well-defined frame. And within this frame, you should give this freedom. So you can tell the person, this is the frame, and within, I trust you, you're the expert, do whatever you want. And if you have a question which is outside of this frame, then please come and ask, or talk to your other frame, colleague who is the frame owner of another frame. And then your task as a manager is to make this frame not leaky, that then all of a sudden the person doesn't know whether it's his responsibility or not. And that allows real freedom. And then it's constructive, because then it's not this pseudo delegation, which there is not really a delegation, because people don't dare to act because they don't know whether they have the right to do so. So I think that's actually a fairer thing. It has to do with governance, and it might seem that you put some rules, but in reality, it's fairer because people know what they can do and what they cannot do. And the frame can be quite large, You don't have to make a mini frame at the beginning, or at the end, maybe it becomes bigger, but then you can just empower really people. So that would be my interpretation of the whole topic and what I've seen.
And how does that apply? You've been talking about it through the lens of the corporate CEO. Yes. How does that work in the mountains? What is the...
It's completely, I think that's very different already on the area where we're thinking of. I think a lot of the conflicts in the areas of the big expeditions, in the 50s where they climbed all the 8,000 meter peaks, I think there was a lot of conflict because of this hierarchical attitude and behavior of the expedition leaders. Why? Because they came from a very hierarchical background. Usually those were military guys. Because those expeditions, or military background, because those expeditions were funded by the state, they were very prestigious, and they had the logistics and everything, so that's very military know-how. So by definition, male military background, you have this hierarchical behavior. It was also in the corporate life at the time like that. So it's also a society-driven development. And on the other hand, I think one of the other conflicts was that the leader, the expedition leader, was not necessarily a very good alpinist. So the acceptance was purely about, the entitlement was purely the position power. And that's always a problem. If people know he or she is the boss, but she's only put there for a reason which is not necessarily the content of the person's, being or existence, but because somebody put for whatever other reason. And we have many examples. That. I mean, one of the best is Theodorovics of the K2 expedition. He was put there by the Italian government. So was he a good alpinist and mountaineer? No. Did he know how to get the state funds and logistics and organize logistics? Yes. So the thing is, I think a lot of those conflicts were between the highly motivated alpinists, experts. Yep. They could act completely independently, and these very bureaucratic, hierarchical, old-fashioned, at the time, not old-fashioned now with our lens, it's always easy to say ex post. At the time, that was the thing, people. Expeditions leaders. And then all of a sudden you're on the mountain, and this entitlement becomes different, because all of a sudden this logistics person who raised the funds and organized the expedition has less know-how about what's going on the mountain. And all of a sudden, these experts took over, and very often with fractions in the expeditions, or Reinhold Messner on Nanga Parbat, but also Hermann Buhl on Nanga Parbat in 1953. He just took off because he knew he could do it, and he took accountability. So the leadership changes, and he goes from this, I say, organizational logistics leadership to the expert. I would call it the expert, because that's then the expert. I mean, you trust the expert. He knows or she knows what is doable on the mountain. And who could really link this really well for the first time, I think, was Sir Brice Bonington. He was a super accomplished mountaineer and achiever. He had credibility in the team. He also created his team only with friends. Same nationality, same background, easy to bond, friends. And he went up there, and not necessarily to their summit. So he exempted himself and said, well, I'm the leader of the expedition. That's another learning, by the way. The leader doesn't have to be on the summit. And then the people went up there, but they all accepted him. That doesn't matter. There weren't any wild discussions. But I think that was the for the time and the consistency of how those expeditions were made up. I think this was the state of the art, what you could have done at the time to cover both. And then he gave the freedom to the people, and that's how it works. So I think, the leadership, you have to probably, it's the expert leadership, and then the rest is like the organization. And the third role, obviously, is the Sirda, with all the logistics on the mountains, with the Sherpa team, which is like a shadow leadership organism on the mountain, which also completely changed at this point now. I'm talking really about the old-fashioned 50s, 60s, 70s expeditions here.
Of course, yeah. And I think it's also interesting because we don't have these, I don't know what to call them, military-style expeditions anymore for the most part. And we're climbing the mountains in small teams of 2 for, I mean, a big expedition now is 10 or 12 people. My first expedition in 1990 was 18 people. And we had a leader. He didn't go we had the walkie-talkie radio check-in every day at 4. The people that got to the summit were climbers. They weren't the leader and so on. But what happens in my experience now is when I'm out in the mountains, whether it's ski touring or alpine climbing, or you leave the hut in the morning, or you leave camp in the morning, or you're on Denali at high camp, you're on Mount Rainier, and there are a bunch of people around you. Almost always. There's maybe it's 4, maybe it's 30, I don't know. And then it's all fine when everything is fine, but then as soon as it's not fine, this group of people who are complete strangers are looking around trying to figure out who knows the most, who's the leader, like who has them, and I've found this personally very awkward quite a few times, both because I very often recognize in the mountains, right? Because that's where people know me.
Yeah, of
and
course.
Also I have the mountain guide badge. I kind of, now that I'm not officially a mountain guide anymore, I stopped wearing it. I took it off my backpacks and pins and stuff, partially because I didn't necessarily want to be made responsible for somebody's disaster. And it's a tough thing because I of course want to help people that are in need, but I can't take responsibility for everybody out there that just happens to be on the same mountain on the same day. And it's sometimes very, very scary, and it creates some very interesting dynamics. And I haven't quite figured out how to navigate that.
It's a very interesting observation because I usually go with mountain guides a lot because I'm not a pro like you. So I for the difficult or also for the less difficult, I fortunately can afford it now. But I go with mountain guides. That's my privilege, my luxury in my life, to have a real super expert. And I remember when we went the haute route with the skis, our mountain guide, he really got mad because of this specific reason. Because we were a good group with him, and the haute route better than I do, and it's a demanding thing, and you want to make sure you know where you go because 1,000 things can happen. And there were these 3 people. And they were without the guide. And you could tell, you can tell whether somebody's
Yeah.
experienced or not, already how he wears the backpack, whether there are 1,000 things dangling around. I mean, you just can't tell if you
Yeah.
have been in the mountains for many years. So you could tell they were not experienced. And so that's very dangerous, as we know. You don't do the haute route if you have no idea where you are. And they were actually attaching themselves to us all the time. And well, they got a free ride, I mean, we pay for the guide. And then it's not only that we pay for the guide and he basically gets abused, but it's also what you're saying. I mean, what do you do if one of those guys falls into a crevasse and they had no clue how to rescue the other person or whatever? And at a certain point, the mountain guide, he stopped. It was foggy, because it was also really bad weather and we had to change a part of the route because of the snowfall. So it wasn't the perfect conditions. So those guys, they were following us. And at a certain point, the guide just stopped and said, okay, let's make a break here. And then they were, they didn't know what to do because they cannot make a break at the same time. And then, and then they were like, and stopped. And then he really was going at them the second time. And he said, look, I mean, you just go ahead now. I mean, you cannot just, follow me. Just go ahead. Where would you go now? They didn't have the slightest clue. I mean, it was fog, And that was such a situation where I thought that's really difficult because you can accept that you get abused and your clients, or you leave them to their destiny and potentially they die because they were really awkward guys. So so we let them follow us, but then he said, look over there, this is the way down because, we had to go down and take another way because of the fog. And there you go, and you don't follow us anymore. And next time we take a guide. But that was a really difficult situation. And I thought of the guide's responsibility, because you have a responsibility and you're even liable. It's like a doctor, you cannot not help.
Yeah, 100%. And his responsibility to you and your group is being compromised because now he's only one person and his attention is being divided by these other people. And that's not fair to you. So it's interesting you mentioned, I was thinking of the haute route and some of my experiences there.
I know, I've seen your documentary.
And you've seen my documentary about
afterwards,
one of my experiences where a big tragedy unfolded right in front of me. And also, like whether you're on the Großglockner or the Piz-Bernina or the Mont Blanc or Mount Rainier. I mean, and I was also a beginner once, right? Like we all have been beginners and we've all been that. And, I learned a side story, but I learned to climb from my father. And my father learned to climb because he was stationed in the U.S. Army in a base in Germany in the late 60s because he decided to enlist and go to Germany rather than be drafted and sent to the Vietnam War.
Good choice.
Yeah. And so he was there for 4 years and near Stuttgart. And one of his fellow enlisted men wanted a climbing partner and taught my dad how to climb. And then they went to the Alps, and that's how they climbed all their mountains. They climbed the Matterhorn, and that's what he told me later. He's like, when he was telling me those stories as a kid, he was like, their whole strategy was to figure out in the hut who the mountain guides were, and then like figure out when they were going to wake up and be awake and be by the door, and then just be 10 meters, 20, 30 feet behind them and follow them up because they didn't know what to do or where to go, but they were young and fit and full of energy and excited for the mountains and stuff. But so it's a time-honored tradition to do that in a way. And what is the response? Who is the leader? Like where's the accountability? Where is the responsibility when something goes wrong? Obviously, when it's sunny and you can just ski from Chamonix to Zermatt in the sun every day, it's easy. It's great, no problem. But on those days when it's really difficult, that's a whole another matter. This brings me to Paul Preuss, and for those of my listeners that don't know who Paul Preuss is, so just look him up in Wikipedia. He's an incredible individual, also from Vienna, I believe, right? Isn't he originally?
I'm not sure whether he was from Vienna. I mean, Austrian for sure, and he also died in Austria. But
I think he was from Vienna, and he once said, and he said, "Das Können ist des Durfens Maß." Ability.
Das Können ist des Dürfens Maß, ja.
Ability is the measure of permission. I love that phrase. Ability is the measure of permission. How do you use that? How do you think about that? Like even for your own self, like as a, a CEO, like not everyone is able to, achieve something like that in their career. Like, how do you know how much permission to give yourself? What's the edge?
Well, apparently you don't always know, because otherwise Paul Bryce also, he died falling off the mountain. Huh? So,
That's
so that apparently...
good point.
Yeah,
Good point.
that's the stretch. Huh?
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think the essential of this quote is that, the limit shouldn't come from anything else but yourself knowing what you're able to do. Now, the question is, are you able to know what you're able to do? And how do you assess that yourself? But it's this, you are allowed to do more the more you can do something and you're able to do that. That was basically what he was referring to. And that's true for everything. If you overestimate yourself, obviously, if you completely go on a wrong route and you fall off, or you get stuck somewhere, that the first ability you should acquire is to get some sort of an assessment what your abilities are. And if you're not able, and I was referring before to this mountain guide, and I wasn't able, because you cannot, if you have not been on the mountain, how would I know? You can read all the guides and it says plus Z, whatever, sehr schwierig, plus, whatever. But that's, it doesn't really tell you whether can I really do it or not. So for me, for example, to figure out whether I can do it because I do have the capability or not, was really the assessment also of an expert, because I don't know. So if this mountain guide went with me, I with him on 5 mountains, he knows me. He knows whether I can climb or not and how much I can climb. And if this specific mountain guide, and again, I very much rely on experts. That's why they are there in professional and in mountain or any other life. If he tells me, look, I think let's train a little and you can do the Shrek one, which I never thought I can do, because I'm not a good rock climber. I never, when there was a rock, I had to climb up, but I didn't specifically train a lot. So when he, as an expert, tells me, you can do that, then I believe him. He's the one who tells me this Können ist des Dürfens Maß. I can, and I do it with him. I would never have had the idea to go there on my own or with somebody non-professional, because I know I'm not good enough. It's not, it's probably, maybe I would have survived, but maybe not. So I think that's also a little bit the lesson. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to know, but you should try to know. You should try to know by any means what is your limit, and you can grow it. The Dürfen you can grow by increasing the Können. And that's also true for the professional life. And I have to say, very often I have, young people, and they're very ambitious and they want to do a lot of things. And I think that's great. But then after a year, they tell me, wow, I've seen everything now. I want to be basically a CEO or whatever, take over a department. And then it's like, well, this is this Dürfens Maß. You should probably get more experience on this and this and this before you are able to do certain things. So, yeah, there's lots of analogy there as well. And at the end of the day, to come back to the acceptance of the leader, where I was mentioning before the ones which were not accepted, well, that's a little bit the thing. You get accepted if you can, if you have the entitlement. And the entitlement comes by very boring, practicing, acquiring a discipline, and make a lot of qualified experiences. And I think that's one of the big advantages of mountaineering compared to corporate life. You get to make some qualified experiences because you're out there. And like your dad, you're just out there and you try it out. Sometimes you're probably in not comfortable positions or situations, but you get to know to do it. You don't only read on it, you do things. In corporate life, very often, you don't you don't have the chance to get this qualified experience, the more you have, the easier it is to learn. And you don't get this, especially if you're not, privileged or whatever. I mean, it's really hard to get somebody to trust in you. Also, this dürfen, you don't know whether somebody thinks that you darf. Yeah? And so I think this qualified experiences is one of the most important things to learn anything. It's like, do it yourself. It's like driving, the first time you drive a car, somebody has explained it 1 million times. You need to do it yourself. You need to do it yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense that you can have an expert tell you when you're ready or when you're able, like, hey, you can train a little bit and you can do the Schreckhorn. Or, I've also used coaches in running my business a lot. But I've like used business coaches, obviously, like fitness, like what the coaching we do. That's actually one of the things I think that coaches in all areas, whether it's a guide or endurance coach or a business coach, is give that validation, right? Like you can do this. Look at what you've done. You've got the background. Because a lot of us our instinct is to sort of self-doubt and think that we can't do it. And then there's some people that are obviously a little overconfident, and that requires a different kind of coaching. But you obviously see both. But what about using yourself as that grantor of the permission? Because you don't always have an expert, especially in something like business where it's something like it has been done before, but exactly that has never been done.
But in reality, it never has been done anyhow. I mean, it's never exactly the same. So the whole thing is about feeling comfortable in acting in ambiguity all the time. And that's one of the major managerial skills. They say, especially now, how do you act in this complete volatile world and everything's unsure? And yeah, but that's one of the main traits. I mean, otherwise it doesn't need us. That's what I always say. I mean, just to coordinate things, you don't need all those highly paid people. I mean, you coordinate. The difference is that you in this opaque environment, in this volatile environment where you cannot anticipate anything at the end of the time. Of the day, you need to carry on, deliver, make decisions left, right. And that's very similar to a mountain because, I mean, at the end of the day, nowadays you have a good weather forecast. Yes, that wasn't always the case. But, I mean, there can be so many things. I remember when we were seeing you in Colorado, you showed us this imprint of this bear. I mean, I was freaking out. I'm so scared of bears. We don't have them. So I was like, oh my God, the mountain is not dangerous, but this bear. And then you told me the story about this cougar and this elk. So I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? That is not what I associate with alpinism. It's like all these animals. So you always need to adapt. There's always something new. And I think that's the art. This agility, it's really like, just go on with it, and stop and don't whine. That's one of the things. Don't whine. That's what it is. I mean, just accept it. Either you can change it. If not, accept it and do something with it. Like in a mountain. I mean, when I did the Ironman, many people said, "Oh, that's so great! I admire you for doing this long distance triathlon. It's fantastic." And I thought, yes, of course, a lot of resilience training and so on. Yes, it's tough. But on the other hand, during this Ironman, you can stop at any given point of time and you just say, I stop. I don't want to go on running or cycling anymore. I stop and go home. I take a shower, I eat, and I go to bed. Nothing happens in my life. On a mountain, how often? I mean, I don't tell you. You probably 1 million times more than me. You said, I would like to stop now. But the alternative is just not there. So I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, I would like to stop. My toes hurt. I have headache. I'm thirsty. Everything aches. Whatever. You cannot. It's simply not there, the option. So that's very similar. You cannot. You can whine. Okay, doesn't really help. Maybe for a short time period it relieves you, but then you better shut up and suffer in silence. And the same is like if something comes along and now there's some volatile interest rates up, down, political havoc, you just need to ask yourself, what can I do? I mean, and then you adapt. that's the whole thing. I mean, it's nothing more than that, really.
Mm.
And I think that's the whole. That's probably something you can apply a little bit everywhere.
Yeah, I think
This
so.
non-whining attitude, I would call it.
I used to have, I got some bad feedback for about 2 years when I was a mountain guide. I had this pin on my backpack and it said "No whining."
Really, you did?
Yeah,
I want
and
to
it was,
have that. I would
yeah,
put it here in front of my office, everywhere. I
on your
would
front door.
distribute it.
You make coffee cups and give them to everybody.
I really love it. I mean, I'm whining myself sometimes, and I'm like, oh no, that's. But then it's rather a little bit. But this constant whining without changing, that's something for nothing. And I recently read something really nice that the Finns, they don't have all the, that the Danes, they have this hickelig, this hickelig, everything is cozy, and they in the long winters they have everything very cozy with candles, and they cuddle up at home, and it's really nice. Huh? And the Finns, they have a different concept. It's really nice as well. I like it. They call it sisu. And it means that you acknowledge risks without dramatizing them, and that you prepare instead of hope, and you just continue to act even with the conditions getting worse and changing. You just go on. And I really like that somehow. It's the complete opposite of the whining. So I would like to, I'm a complete promoter of the sisu. I feel a little bit Finnish here.
Yeah, I like that as well. And it's not in this part of I'm looking for it in my notes because I had something that it was similar to this that had come up for me. Oh, what makes people miserable is that when events are controlling them, and what makes people happy is when they're controlling events. So it's
Absolutely.
this idea of agency and
Yes.
and just taking action.
Yeah, exactly. Be the master of your own destiny. And to come back, we talked about Viktor Frankl. That's the whole thing.
Exactly.
That's what he said.
Yep.
Even if I'm in the worst condition, nobody can tell me what I'm thinking, how I'm inclined to react, or how I'm inclined to feel, and what I'm making out of it. And this is just amazing. When he wrote a book there.
Yeah. In a concentration camp where some of his campmates were being sent to the gas chambers. And I mean, just like it doesn't get worse, right, than that. And he found in that situation a way to control his reaction. Because he found purpose.
And it's this whole purpose thing, which is very popular nowadays, but that was he had a purpose, and he actually studied people who did not have any purpose, thus people who knew, for example, that their entire families were not there anymore and they didn't have this purpose anymore. They died earlier than other people who still had this hope. And what many people don't know, but Viktor Frankl, actually before the war, he created a suicide prevention department, clinic, for young people, mainly men, who in the midst between the First and the Second World War, many young men committed suicide, either because they came back from the war and they were completely traumatized and there were no psychologists or anything like that at the time who helped them, or not post-traumatic orders know what they had, or and then they didn't find work. They were not included in society. There were super unemployment rates, obviously, in between the two wars. So there was an extremely high rate of suicides in Vienna. And Viktor Frankl actually took them, and he had this program together with them, with this therapy, the logotherapy, which he developed. He developed, the sense of purpose and how to save them and how to not commit suicide. So this was the whole basis of his thoughts, actually, was before the war. That's quite interesting because it really comes back to this purpose theme. Yeah.
I think that this is also very interesting to dive into. I'm going off of my script here, but it's so interesting and it's such a good conversation. Where is the difference between the kind of doing something because you feel a duty to do it, or you're motivated, like you have a strong will and I'm going to do this because I said I was going to, or versus it's like that's more of this duty responsibility. And I felt like Viktor Frankl was talking more about those kinds of purposes, like people had a duty to their family, or they had a business back home, or someone to take care of, those kinds of things. But there's another kind of motivation, which is more of this, which is, and I'm not sure where Frankl would have fit in here, is like, for me, it's, uphill athlete, because it's a vehicle for me to help my community of mountain people, right? That's how I see this as fitting into my life. And it's sort of like my heart pulls me forward, and it's very abstract. And I mean, I think a lot of businesses try to figure out, how do we get our teams, our employees, our leadership to be pulled by, I mean, it sounds silly to like love insurance, but through financial products like insurance, you're helping people to, hedge against risk, and that would otherwise destroy their property or their business or whatever you're insuring them for. How do you think about that? What is the intersection between what is just sort of like this determination versus like, I love this and I want to do it, and the mountains and business? How does that all fit together in your mind?
Well, I think basically what we're talking about is already two types of motivations, which, it's the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. I think the intrinsic motivation is really something which you genuinely appreciate yourself for yourself. And that the easy test to find out whether it's intrinsic or not is, would you do it and enjoy it the same if you didn't tell about what you did to other people? Now, in our world of the social medias and everything, that's a very valid question. How much of the things would people really do if they weren't allowed to tell anybody about it? How much would they climb Everest? Many of them, if they were not allowed to tell anybody that they were up there. I'm not sure how many would go. So that's not an intrinsic. I mean, you could say, yes, the intrinsic motivation is to show off. Okay, that's another thing. But I'm like this pull, which you feel you want to do something. And, I think alpinists know that, or mountain lovers know that. Huh? You have this, you feel it. You need, for me, it's like if I haven't seen a mountain for 1 month or so, I need to at least go out for a hike and go back to Switzerland. And, it's intrinsic. But the same is, if you do something really for your own will and pleasure, and because you really like it, or help people, or whatever it is, it's intrinsic. Extrinsic is really, you get something from outside and you're motivated by it. The easiest thing is the salary, the award, something which, and that's obviously a very valid motivation as well, because it's never unidimensional, because with this reward, you might do then something which you intrinsically love, The difficult part for companies is to get this intrinsic motivation in the workforce. And sometimes you feel that, if you have a project and you really, really like it, that's intrinsic. Then you don't think about your salary, your bonus, whatever that you get an award. You really want to get it going, see the success, celebrate with the team. That's why it's so important to celebrate also successes afterwards, because that really triggers this intrinsic motivation, versus then afterwards you get awarded, you're on LinkedIn, you get the best employee of the month or whatever, which is also valid. I'm not saying one is good and bad, it's just different. And we need to distinguish the two. In the corporate world, obviously, the extra, the salary is one of the most important things, or most important. People go to work because they have to earn their living for obvious reasons. So I think that's if you think about the professional alpinists, they match that. At the end of the day, they have this pull. depends how much is left over after all the stress of posting all in the media, social media, and so on. Because then that's again this extra, But that's another thing. But I think that's a little bit the thing. And coming back to the purpose, I mean, all the companies try to define some sort of purpose because it's easier if you know why you're working. Most people would say, well, to earn my living, yes. But I think it makes a difference. And you alluded to that. I think in my industry, it's really easy to find a purpose because, imagine society with no insurance industry. That's quite sad. Huh? I mean, insurance came into being because of this cooperative approach. That means in some village, in the Valois history, there was the Glarus. It's a city near Zurich. It burned down 160 years ago. And then, there was no insurance. So obviously, then people put funds together, how to rebuild the city, how to, and they created a fund. That's the history of an insurance. You create a fund and then, it's a mutualization of the funds. So that's actually a very, to solve a social problem, a problem of a society. A cow dies and the poor, peasant or farmer couldn't afford a second cow, then the village would save and give him another cow. Otherwise, the family. I mean, I'm now a little bit exaggerating the situation, but that's where insurance comes from. So it has a role in society. Now, obviously, not everything is always only positive because the way how it was distributed and so on. There are many things which you could also say is not so much the purpose, but generally speaking, I think insurance, it's easy to say you have a good purpose. And if you do it nicely, in a good and proper way, you really play an active role in society. So I think in my industry, it's easy. I don't know about other industries. And there are certain industries, I'm not sure whether you want to work there, if you have this ambition or this, sort of personal finding your own purpose if you work for some, I don't know, of the not so good industries, for example. So for me, it's really, I think it's easy to define that. And also that's what I repeat always to my staff, because it's a nice industry to be in, actually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, as you know, I spent 23 years working at Patagonia, and they had a very clear purpose, and everybody knew what it was. And it's one of these companies that has been talked about so much and used as an example in this way. And it really just originated from the very genuine sense of kind of responsibility. But it's this. I think one of the things I really admire about the Chenards, and both Yvonne and Melinda Chenard, is they look at the environmental issue, 20, 30 years ago, and felt overwhelmed, but they took that Sisu mentality and we're going to work towards a solution anyway. We're not going to give up. We're not going to just sit here and not do anything. We're going to do something, and we're going to move forward. And they over time accomplish all kinds of incredible things through
that's a fantastic story, and I think that's one of the ones where it's really genuinely started with their passion, a hobby also. I mean, climbing, and then they just did their own hooks and everything because it wasn't there. All of a sudden, not over the many, many years, they became billionaires, and then they were really, investing in a strategic way in natural resources and reserves and what I admire most is, and they're living a good life, their life. It's not giving up one for the other, and that was always, because you asked me before how I combined the corporate and the mountaineering. I think that's, for me, was one of the things I always wanted to accomplish, and I think it's okay how it worked out. That it's easy to, easy. It's not easy if you have no money, but it's easier if you just went to, I wasn't probably good enough to become a professional, but to do one thing, it's probably more efficient. But to play on two sides of this in this life and do both above average, that was what, I wanted to have a good life and have a good career. And I think the Patagonia, they had, they wrote this book, Let My People Go Surfing. I'm sure you read it. And that's a little bit the thing. I mean, they worked hard, but then, I mean, they had a good life, and I think that's the good thing. You can work hard and have and throw on your passions as well, because that's a little bit, the tricky thing. How do you organize that? And I always admire people who were able to do both the most.
And I can say for all the things that I've read about them that sound like they're out of a PR press release or something, it's all true. Like all my experiences that I lived, if it's a morning on a Monday and the surf is really good, guess what? There's nobody in the office.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
when the deadline is due and the thing has to get shipped or whatever, and it's Saturday or Friday night, everyone's in the office.
You show up.
It is they show up and they just get it done, and and they know that there's this give and take, and that's how the reality of life isn't always like Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
No, exactly.
Life happens when it happens. Often it happens at Friday at 5 o'clock too, like when all the bad news comes out or whatever. So I think that's important that people are on that. And I noticed this it's one of the things I look for in as we develop our coaching team internally with our endurance coaches at Uphill Athlete, is looking for those people that it's fine to have boundaries and say, this is when I'm going to be available to my athletes and this is when I'm not and stuff.
Yeah,
But I always ask, well, what if such and such? And the ones that are like, well, yeah, in that case, I would go the extra mile because that's, and not that I want them to overextend themselves, but I just want the kind of person that is going to go the extra mile and also understand that there are times when there's weeks when everything goes super well with your athletes, when coaching is pretty easy. And then there's other weeks where it's really hard because all of a sudden, all these things seem to go in waves.
Yeah.
I want to connect back to something that the American listeners won't know about or recognize, but you've done a lot of work with SOS Kinderdorf, which is I don't know exactly what the equivalent in the US would be, but it would be something like, I think what we have is called Salvation Army, and it's kind of
it's just helping kids abroad. I mean, kids in countries where they are not so privileged usually.
And you've done, you're in this incredible, accomplished role. I don't know, in the insurance industry. How do you see that connection? Like where is the connection between being a leader in business and doing this kind of work? That's whether it's a volunteer work or
it's pro bono. It's all pro bono. Well, I think it's a little bit of a, you always think, how could you leverage a little bit what you're giving back? But also not only to, hang around and not do anything, but just fun. I mean, fundraising is also good, but how can you leverage your know-how somewhere else? And typically in NGOs, as an accomplished corporate manager, it's quite, you can quite support, because typically NGOs, they don't have a lot of the governance which we're used to. Or what I found, for example, very interesting is I wouldn't have thought of fundraising having so much in common with a distribution channel of an insurance. I mean, if you lead a tied agents force, and you train them to sell insurance policies, non-life life insurance, they need to go out and have a narrative, a pitch. They are trained, need a good story, and then a good product, obviously. And then they go out and you manage them as a sales team, with incentives and everything. So that's very much the same. I mean, if you're a fundraiser for whatever NGO, you go out there, you have a narrative, you have a story to tell, you have a good product, hopefully, and you train those people right, and then they come back and hopefully return with funds. Same with processes. They need to be very lean in NGOs because you need to also fulfill certain requirements, because if too much of it goes to admin fees, then you're not credible. As an NGO, if you waste half of your money for your own, admin, that's probably not a good idea. So things like that, so you can actually help shape those organizations which usually don't have access to expensive consultants or leaders from companies like with the experience we have. So I thought that's quite fruitful, and I wouldn't have thought that it's that that there's so many similarities at the end.
Mm-hmm. You've done a lot of work with something called Generation CEO. What is that, and how does that tie in?
That's actually an association I've joined 12 years ago, something like that, of women. It was founded by a gentleman, a headhunter at the time, I think in 2007, who realized that there's a lack of women leaders for succession planning, and there were more and more calls for women. And I can say for myself, I've always been very like the only woman in the boards or anything like that, because I'm around for many years. I have a corporate career of 30 years now. And so he decided to have this, like at the time it wasn't an association yet, but he said, let's have a sort of a club, a get together of very highly qualified women in certain positions. And it's called Generation CEO. That meant who have the potential to become a CEO, like the next generation CEOs. And I was accepted because you have to apply, and I was be recommended. It's a purely German-speaking association out of Germany, but then they extended to Austria and Switzerland because also German-speaking. And I joined there. I was accepted, and it is an exceptional, nice community. Now we are already a lot. We are 240, I think. But it's a very nice community of very high-level managers from different industries, women only, and with a very trustful relationship. And it auto-corrected itself at the end. There was this association, but now it's really, there's a lot of things going on, really created by the members themselves. I've been in the selection committee for the women to apply, and there we have, for example, also created the whole process how you apply, which wasn't at the beginning very professional, but now we have video applications, a system. It's very rigorous, a very good process, and it really lives by the members. I really enjoyed it because it allows me to exchange with fellow women in similar positions, which you wouldn't meet otherwise because they're of different industries in completely different cities. I have really gained great friends there, also some of them which I go to the mountains. And but what is really nice that it has this self-created dynamics. One thing we have started a couple of years ago is organized trips. If one of us is in another country and has access to local leaders, politicians, access because you're the CEO of this country or whatever, then we would organize a trip in this specific country for the women, and then have this exclusive, not exclusive in terms of luxury, but exclusive access to leaders in that country. And I've been in Tunisia there, and I myself, I organized the trip to Luxembourg last year. So where we met, the people of the financial world, female wine producer, the female director of the local international art museum, local Luxembourg, Mudam. So we had put up a really nice program, and I brought them here in this office, and I made them also meet all my women leader of Baloise here in Luxembourg. So those are the things which I really enjoy. And nowadays there are some really like CEOs in this association. Yeah.
One of the things that I learned from the Chenards at Patagonia, and he writes about this in his books as well, is he leans heavily to hiring women throughout the Patagonia organization. And I have to say, like, that's been something that I've learned and I've applied within Uphill Athlete, where I'm really trying to not only just have half of our coaches and, management team and marketing team, the people making the decisions, guiding our little organization, but now it's like I'm the only man. And one of the things that the reason, so when I was younger and mostly in university, I noticed how hard my female students, co-students were working, and they were very good. And later, as we got like further and further along in that education process, I noticed also that it got harder and harder for them. This sort of built-in sexism that was still existing this time and still exists many places now. If I have to find a lawyer or a dentist or a doctor, I will purposely seek out a woman in that role, because I think, well, that she had to be like 20% better than everybody else to achieve the same thing. So she's going to be really good, and I'm going to be able to really trust her. There's another narrative that is being pushed frequently these days, and that is this idea, and maybe this is just an American thing, and I don't want this podcast to get political by any means, but there is this narrative that you'll hear where people will say, oh, that woman is a diversity hire. She's not a better qualified man, but they had to hire a woman because they needed to meet their diversity targets or something. What do you say to that kind of narrative that when people say things like that? How do you respond as a female?
Look, I'm already glad you said that women have to fight harder to get where they are, because yes, I agree. The thing is, I can tell you what I do when I hire people, and I've just hired because I'm in a transformation here. So my executive committee here, there are also some fairly new hires, both of them men, and not because I privileged men. On the contrary, but I want to make sure I take the best person. Huh? That's for me as a manager. I wouldn't do myself a favor if I take somebody who's less competent because of any other criteria. However, what I really insist, and that's not the service I always get, is that headhunters propose me also a list of women, not only the first list, 15 men. And that's not the norm yet. So I always send back the first list and say, give me some women. And they always, or very often, come back and say, I don't find them, it's so hard. And I have to say, well, yes, okay, make an extra effort. I don't care, that's your job. There are women out there. We're not in medieval ages in the dark where women are working. Here in Luxembourg, I mean, you can, shop around in France and in Belgium. It's French speaking. I mean, if you do an effort. So then I myself went to the LinkedIn of myself and I proposed some names within half an hour of research. And I said, look, that's your job. So this is but at the end, I had two lists. I had two final candidates, a woman and a man. I picked the man because at the end of the day, he was the better candidate for me. So that needs to be a very objective, fact-based decision. However, the pipeline needs to be the same, and that's what the main problem is. And also within the companies, I like to have a pipeline, and everything, develop the talents ourselves. That's not reality, especially if you're smaller. But there is no pipeline. If you cannot pick off the same amount of people, then by definition, there's always the same who get to the top. So that's, I think, one of the major things we need to make sure is that if we hire, that we have this, maybe not the same amount. I would also accept less, but you need to have women there, because otherwise it's so easy not to have them in the sample which you get. And as for the what you were mentioning, the diversity thing, it's not an American thing, it's all over. And I think, the interesting thing is when I was younger and people said, we're talking about quotas, quotas in the boards and so on, I was always against it because I was young and I said, well, exactly, we don't need quotas, it will happen automatically in the course of time. Now, 30 years later, I can tell you I'm pro-quota. Now, if I get a shitstorm, that's fine, I can deal with that. But in certain positions, you need first to break the structure by force, if it doesn't happen otherwise, by quotas. And I'm talking now purely non-executive boards, not executive boards, for the moment being, in my example, because the non-executive boards, the recruitment procedures are more opaque than for executive boards. So if I hire a manager, it's, there's a profile out there, or the headhunter is chasing your executive board member, like the CEO or the CTO, CEO, etc., CFO. If you hire the non-executive boards, they are usually not, I mean, now more and more, but there was no process. I mean, this was a person sitting in the non-executive board and saying, well, whom could I take of my friends here? Who would be, and there was no, I'm talking now 20 years back, there was not a lot of governance, fit and proper requirements, not so really strictly enforced. So basically, it was an award you got after your career, and since the only careers were there were the male people, and then so by definition it's only male. So that is a self-triggered propelling process because there is no process. So that's why to break this pattern, you can only have a forced situation, and once it's broken, it's okay, because then you're again there are women and men. So I think that was essential, and you can see it now. It's not 50-50 yet, but in some countries it was 30% compulsory in France, Germany, and it worked. All of a sudden there are those women, you could say they are not all completely unqualified and all there for the quota. Some of them there might. Yes, there are certainly some women they are there, they wouldn't be there without the quota, but I have a wild guess. Most of them are qualified because it's really difficult to put somebody completely unqualified. So for me personally, that's a non-topic. If somebody would ever say you're there for the gender, I can only laugh, because then look at the CV and the qualification. It's usually the double of anybody else. So yes, it's true. You have to overperform to justify and to be really a little bit immunized against such things. But frankly speaking, I don't care. And I personally, I experienced how nicely it changes the atmosphere in a positive, very interactive and very productive atmosphere if it's mixed. I'm not saying only women, I'm not saying only men. It's really this interaction. It's just a nicer atmosphere. And I've experienced that once in an unconscious way when I was invited to a leadership seminar in one of my previous companies for managers. And it was a top executive leadership training for 3 days from the London School of Economics. And after we were 24 people, and after a day I thought there's something different than usually at those meetings. Something is better. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And then all of a sudden I counted and I found out there were 8 women. And that was completely odd for me, because usually I'm all alone in these meetings. I mean, all those group pictures I have, it's always me, maybe a second woman, and then many, many black suits. That's the finance industry. And I thought, that's really interesting, because they always scientifically talk about this 30%, which then changes the dynamics in a group. 30%, you're not a minority anymore. You are not, not everybody's aware of you. If you're the only one, you go out and grab a coffee. Everybody knows this person now went out and grabbed a coffee and comes back. If you're a third, you're not a minority. Nobody realizes you anymore. You're just included. You mingle, And I figured that's really funny that I didn't even realize there are 8 women and 16 men. It was only afterwards when I figured what is different. Why is it nicer? Why is it more constructive? And also the speaking time was different. Because if you're the only woman, you always get over-talked. Anyhow, you cannot imagine that's how much I talk. But it happens. You just get over-talked. Nobody listens. It's like, that happens. It's not because everybody's mean. That's how it is in a group dynamic. And with this 30%, that doesn't happen. And that really was for me such a turning point where I thought, well, this scientifically, or this recommendation must have some scientific proof, because it's true. It does something to a group. It does something to the dynamics of a group.
I want to connect this back to the permission.
Mm-hmm.
How can we give, how can I as a man, but how can we as a community give women more permission to be in these leadership roles, both in the boardroom, but also in the mountains?
I think it's a lot. What I'm experiencing a lot is that women and that's a little bit of a stereotype, but it's true. It's they underestimate themselves a little bit, and that's. But for example, in the jobs, if you offer a project or a additional job or whatever to a man, and that happened many times. I said, would you like to take on this project or something? The typical response I get would be yes, and would I get a salary rise, or what's my new title, or yes, of course, yeah. And if you do the same with a woman, she would say, are you sure I can do it? Are you really sure I can do that? And then my standard answer is always, well, I would never ask you if I wasn't sure. I wouldn't think you can do it. And that's very typical. So what can we do as leaders? And that's probably the same in the mountains, because you always, I told you my experience. I wouldn't have dared to just go to the Schreckern, but I wanted somebody to give me a little bit of a comfort. Maybe it's also the risk aversion of women themselves, but there is this little bit. That doesn't mean that we are more cowardice or anything. That's not. It's something about self-assessment and risk-taking. Maybe that's different. And there is this study. I think the Österreichische Alpenverein, the Austrian Alpine Association, I think they did this study with the avalanche propensity of people. There's like 80% of more than 90% of the avalanche incidences where people die or are in avalanches are men. And they said, well, okay, there are more men doing skiing tours. Yeah, but nowadays it's 50-50 nearly, 55-45. But it's nearly the same amount of women going ski touring, and you probably can confirm, than men. So why is it still that 90%? Well, because the risk-taking is different. There's a steep slope, and they're like, oh, okay, let's give it a try and go down. And women wouldn't. So there is a difference of risk-taking, perception. And I think this entitlement, this permission, sometimes that has to do with that you're not sure, and so you might not take the risk, or you might need a certain confirmation by somebody else, and then you feel better. Maybe it's that, but I've made this experience really in corporate life, and also with applications. You get applications, it's described the task, and you get it from male applicants, and they fulfill half, and they apply. And the woman, they would tell you, well, there's one line, and I didn't do that yet, so I cannot apply. And that's a gender bias somehow. Why, I don't know, but it is that way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we can help by just being aware of it, right? Like, it's the same.
Aware and encourage. Encourage.
Yep.
It's the same with negotiating for salaries. Very rarely women would do that, and then they get a worse salary. You need to speak out. So you need to encourage, and if you know that, then yes, that needs to be made explicit. Yeah.
What is the connection for you between the confidence gained in the mountains and the confidence gained in having these, positions and experiences and opinions that you have in your professional life? Is there a connection? Does one feed the other?
I think absolutely. Whether it's only mountains or sports in general, I don't know. I think it's sports in general, but mountains obviously has a tick of a more extreme or potentially more dangerous sport. But because I really love sports, and I think for young people, especially for young women, I always had the feeling it gives them so much self-confidence, especially in the teenage years or early years where you really don't know who you are and so on. And sports helps you in this time to be a self-confident person, also in terms of body, self-awareness and so on. If you look at the young basketball player or young athletes, and that is also for the mountains, they have this self-confidence and they develop it over the achievements, and what they can do and what they are able to do. And then afterwards, and that was intuitive, I always thought there must be some link to then afterwards, like how you behave in corporate life, whether you're self-confident or not. And then, so I am always an advocate for sport, and I thought it might have even a good impact for young girls to be better managers or more successful and self-confident. And then I found an American study. They did the American Sport Association or something, and they did actually a study over 20 years. So it was a long study where they observed young girls who did sports, like volleyball or something like that, but really quite engaged, not once a week, like really engaged young sports women, ladies, girls at the time. How many of them would then, and what would they become? And there was an exceptional high percentage of those who were successful in sports in their teenage and young adult life would become leaders, managers. Because in sports, and that's again true for mountaineering as well, either you have a team sport, then you learn all these team dynamics. You learn, however, and that's true for all sports, resilience, and you know how to deal with failure. On the mountain or on the basketball field, I mean, you fail. By definition, you fail. Now you can go and cry and stop, or you can go on and train harder and do it again. And that's a little bit the whining thing which we referred to before. And I think that's something which carries over. I mean, it gives you self-confidence because you did it at the end, or not, but that's also learning to go on. And all this attitude and this confidence that you can do something in something which is really hard more than anybody else, that I'm sure that carries over to you, who you are and how you act. So yes, if you ask me, not specifically mountaineering, but there you have this extra, risk or whatever you want to call it. Yes, it certainly will. I mean, this study actually was the proof of the pudding, that those women, I think it's 80% of them or so, don't nail me on the results, but it was an exceptionally high percentage of those who then became top managers, leaders, and had this accountability also, discipline, accountability.
One of the reasons that I started this Voice of the Mountains is, it's part of our podcast, but it's not about training at all. It's and I have this thesis, and I think you touched on it earlier. One of the reasons that mountains are so powerful is you can't just step off the bike or get off and go home and take a shower, right? And what that forces you to realize how much more capable you are than you realized, because you get into situations you're like, I wish this was over. I wish I was in bed. Like, I wish I could take a shower right now. And it's like, I have a long ways to go. And it's in my own climbing career, I realized like how I could push that in increments, in small steps, as you said in the beginning, but I could push that so much further out than I ever even imagined when I started. Like, I didn't even know. It's like, that was going to the moon. And I was just trying to do the next step, but I couldn't go directly to the farthest reaches. I had to take all the steps to get there. And I think that's part of the beauty of the mountains, is that whether it's running around Mont Blanc or climbing Mont Blanc, you can't just like say, I'm just going to go home. It just doesn't work that way. And we are so much more capable. And I think, as you said, women are so much more capable generally and often in so many ways than they give themselves credit for or realize. And I think this giving of permission is such an important idea. And I just think that there's so much media and attention on things like football or these, basketball, or these sports like that. And, I like those sports. It's fun to watch sometimes. And it takes grit, and you fail and all these things. But it's for me still like the mountaineering community, the mountain community in general, just has so much to teach society about grit and how far we can push ourselves and how much we're actually capable of. That, a 1 hour game, just or 90-minute game is never going to teach. And I really feel passionate about that. And I really want us as a community to I think we have an obligation to sort of step into that and be like, and I think Reinhold Messner, he's been like exhibit A of doing this really well in all his career, where he's just like pushed himself out further and further and further and provided this incredible inspiration for, millions of people. And we all have a responsibility to do that, whether we're amateurs or professional. I think it's really like, this is just a step-by-step process. And
no, absolutely. I completely agree. And what I really like, to come back also to the women, I really like to see how many young women mountaineers are out there doing great things, which you wouldn't have thought. And, between them, with a grit, which I thought that's a new generation. And that's really something which changes in society. Those young ladies up the mountain, I mean, that's really something. You know, I follow them all on Instagram and have a look, and I really like that. So that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to
Something
see
which
that.
you wouldn't have found 40 years ago or something like that. Yeah.
You know,
And
in
they get
1990.
sponsorship and they get awareness. That's the thing. It's interesting, you know. I mean, in one of my interviews in my thesis I had with Arlene Bloom, the U.S. climber, and she's a fantastic woman. She must now be in her late 70s, I think and maybe 80. And
She led the
at the
first all-female ascent of Annapurna, among others.
Exactly. And you know, and she climbed Mount McKinley also with a few female expedition, and they all said, that's a feminist thing. And she said, well, actually not. I wanted to climb it with men, but we were not allowed to join at the time. I mean, it was a pure, you know, male club. So we had to organize it ourselves in order to be able to get up there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have, you know, I would have joined men, but they didn't take me. And it was funny because she was always these feminists, and they wanted just to stay between them. No, they didn't, but there was no other means. So I thought, well, this has been a long way since then. And yes, the Annapurna climb was I think in the 70s, 78. So that's not that far. I mean, you know, we were both alive, and
yeah.
you know, it's not that
I remember 1878.
And now you have, exactly. So and now you have those young women, and they get sponsorship, and they have the nearly, and not yet the same, but there's they're catching up in awareness, and so I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
And I remember when I was still working as a Patagonia ambassador, having this discussion internally as an ambassador team, like if we should be 50-50 men, women. And we had a lot of women on our team compared to some other teams, because Patagonia has, I think, always been very pro-female. And we had to, like, with the quota, that was basically the same conclusions. Like, we have to break this system, and the only way we're going to do it is if we hold ourselves to what we think should be the standard, you know, because there was surprisingly, you know, there's always this discussion. And I think, like, to reset the system, sometimes you need to, I know, not break it wholly, like not destroy it, like we destroy society and I'll go back and live in caves and then rebuild from the ground up, but just like break this one thing and, like, you know, level
till
it
it
up
becomes normal, you know.
and let it
One
heal.
of the examples, it's like the belt. You remember still when we drove around the cars without a belt, and you know, if you had asked anybody, do you want to wear a belt? No, of course not, because it's uncomfortable. At the beginning it was fixed, nobody wanted it, everybody said, I didn't die before, I won't die now, so why have it? So it had to be enforced. Now maybe that's not the same example, but you know, those things nowadays, I mean, you know that the rate of accidents, of fatal accidents, and all those injuries, they dropped substantially. I mean, it's not even comparable, although there are more cars and they're faster, because of the belt. So this nowadays, nobody would ever complain about the belt. It's just there. So initially, some of those things, they need to have this little push to be enforced, and then you can you live in a better, you know, situation at the end of the day. So
absolutely. Yeah. So if we go back to that young girl on the racks, or the young woman humbled on Huayna Potosí, or, you know, climbing your 48 summits in Switzerland, or researching the expedition leaders, or being a board member and CEO, what is the one thread that connects all those different versions of you?
One thread. I mean, there's always the mountains, obviously, but I think it's the curiosity. I think that's the major. I think I was always curious to do something the next, and that alludes to everything, the mountains, the corporate field. You know, I'm also a passionate scuba diver and scuba diving instructor. It's not only limited. I mean, the biggest passion is the mountains. I just come back from a liveaboard in the Philippines, 10 days on a ship, you know, scuba diving every day, 4 days, four times. So it's this curiosity combined with passion. And what I also learned is the more, you know, the passion comes from the frequency, also the action. And let me put that in. I mean, you can like mountains, you know, but if you're never in the mountains and you don't regularly go there, it's not that you forget it, but the more you're out there, I mean, isn't it the fact that then you get really, you want to do more and you have another idea and then you're like, oh, another day would be great, but now I have to go back. When I'm here in the office and I'm completely absorbed in the office work, sometimes I forget even about it, and I don't even take the pleasure out of thinking about the mountains and a mountain tour. And sometimes I'm afraid I'm not passionate anymore. But it's actually, it comes via the action. The action increases the passion. Like in German, we have the saying, mit dem Essen kommt der Appetit, which is when you eat, you get even more hungry because it's so good. I think that's a little bit the thing. So I'm not sure whether that's a common thread, but the curiosity opened so many interesting. I was always interested in seeing more and doing more, but then you have to engage to a certain level to get to a certain level to have this an appetite which is increased all the time. So yeah, I think and everything I did and I do is I like somehow. It's not that I always like everything. You don't like suffering on a mountain. You don't, what we just said, I don't always like my work. That's completely normal. But generally speaking, I don't think I sold my soul and I didn't do anything completely what I hated for a long time period.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a great summary. And I think, there's one of the things I really like about, you and our friendship over the years is you've been one of these people that I've been able to, we've known each other even even though we don't see each other very often, but 20 years now or more since we first met.
True, 20 years. Yeah.
And you were always able to work hard and like advance in your career. And you were also able to allow yourself to enjoy life. And I think that there's a lot of people, and maybe this comes from me as an athlete. I always had this, like, I just have to work hard and work harder. And I didn't give myself permission to enjoy anything outside of that. And I had to eat really strictly and I had to sleep really strictly. And I didn't drink alcohol and I didn't stay up late and I slept this many hours and like everything was super, super disciplined. And at a certain time you wake up and you're like, wow, like, my friend Christine, she's like scuba diving in the Maldives now, and like, or the British Virgin Islands, or I don't know what. And you start to think like, there's a lot of value in being able to do both and being able to balance like that work ethic and that whether it's an intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, but you're working hard, you're creating things, you're adding value to the teams around you and to society. And, you're going and skiing the Haute Route or going to your favorite resort on the weekend or going somewhere and scuba diving. And I think that this is a balance that a lot of us really struggle to find, like how to be good, as you said, above average, but I think you're a little more than above average in more than one realm. And it's always a very difficult thing to do. And I really admire you for how you've navigated.
But let's put things into perspective. I think it's really nice what you're saying, but you cannot compare my achievements with yours. You in the mountains, if you want to achieve what you achieved, you need to go all in. I mean, that's the thing, you need to go 150, 200%, and you need to do everything you did because otherwise you are not there. You cannot go diving on the Maldives and climb Nanga Parbat on the Rupal face in alpine style. No, I mean, you're already Superman like that, but then you are an extraterrestre. So that's exactly the choice you make. And what you're referring to is a normal person like me. I'm not an athlete like you have ever been. I'm a good athlete, but, then I think that this balance, I see it rather with my colleagues that, the balance is sometimes too much corporate, and then at a certain age, they wake up and they're like, oh, wow, maybe I die in 10 years because, I should live. That's a little bit awkward. You should think about that yourself. And I had certain rules, which I never, because I'm curious, I really like to do other things as work as well, but I love my work. But I never threw away a single holiday in my entire life. And we have much more holidays, as you know, than in the US. 6 weeks, 7 weeks, whatever. I took all my sabbaticals between jobs. So the thing is, that's choices you make. unless you're a professional athlete, then you just do that for a certain time. You don't do anything else. By definition, look at Roger Federer. I mean, he was skiing after 15 years after his tennis because it was forbidden for him as a tennis star. So that's normal. So I think what you're saying is true for normal people. For athletes like you, at the time, you couldn't have done it otherwise. I mean, that's what.
But here's my question for you then. Do you think what you learned from the mountains is any different than what I learned?
That's a good question. I think you must have, learned. Always everything is relative. Huh? I think you have probably lived much more intense situations on the mountain than I ever did. So I probably got a glimpse of the entire universe of what you got. But I've been certainly sometimes as scared as you were on the mountain somewhere, asking myself, why am I here? I could be in bed now, somewhere. So it's a difficult question. I don't know. But it's probably the personal inclination of self-reflection and the willingness to learn what you take away. And that can be different according to whatever experience you've made. So that's difficult to answer. I think we all learned something. Yes.
Yeah. One of the reasons I purposely moved out of being a sponsored athlete is I came to the opinion that my experiences as an ultra expert at the tip of the spear of of alpinism were no more interesting or valuable or relevant than anyone else's. And it just started it, and therefore it didn't feel authentic to be put on a pedestal, or to put myself on a pedestal, or to have my stories broadcast on television, or or get attention or awards. Or it's like, why is what I do any better than what Christine does? Or it's because at the end of the day.
But that's, I think that's a very interesting thing about, I think that has to do with the personal development, and not with, because there is no absolute truth. And, some people tell me, why do you go to the stupid mountains all the time? I mean, that's completely useless, or when I dive or whatever, or run, and there is no absolute truth. And for young alpinists, probably you were a hero. So obviously you were much more than anybody else for this particular population, because they looked at Steve House, this guy, they wanted to be like you. So I think you cannot compare it. Some of the young women probably look up to me and say, wow, it's possible to become a CEO. So it's always in the context, to see in the context, and as long as you feel authentic and happy with what you do for others or for yourself, again, that's also without a weight, there's no better or worse. So what you're saying is actually that for yourself, it didn't feel right anymore, because I'm sure there were still people out there who were willing and interested in listening to your stories. It's not that there were no, but you didn't feel any more the same about it. So that's a very conscious decision, and so you started a new part of your life, which is completely legitimate, but that doesn't mean that nobody would have been interested, or that it's less or more, it's in your field. That's what it is. I mean, nobody can take that away. It's the achievement. That's what you did, your legacy. So I wouldn't see it like, but I understand that you are not interested in it anymore. At a certain point, you do something else, but which is still related, where you have this entitlement, a certain because you have the credibility, So I think
and that was one of the things I was looking for, exactly. Like, how can I take this credibility that I've earned and translate it into something positive, other than just doing lectures about Nanga Parbat for the rest of my life.
But you're at a step which many professionals, including me, don't know what to do after the end of the professional life. Usually they go into boards and do some board work. But at the end of the day, that's a very similar life, just with less work, working hours than before. But to really consciously, and I'm in an age that many people start thinking about that now, whom I know. What do you do afterwards when you all of a sudden, and that's a new aspect, you don't need to earn money anymore, because at a certain point you're always like, well, I need the money, I need to survive, and then all of a sudden you might be, wow, I can either stop or I'm retired or whatever. And it's not the money. So what do you really do afterwards? And that's a very good question. It's a luxury question, obviously. It's a luxury question. But the thing is, it has very much to do what you went through, because it's like a very, it's a break in your curriculum. You stop doing what you always did successfully, actually. Your work, your mountaineering. Yeah. And what, I was asking myself, what would I have done if I had been a millionaire or something like that? I probably wouldn't have done the same life, because the origins come just from, you get an education to work something and earn your life. So that's a very interesting thing. And I see these conversations arising a lot. And some people have this early, like you did, and you already successfully developed something, which is your person, depending on it, not the position bar. Because if I'm gone tomorrow from the company, I'm just Christina, like a Christina on the mountain, or scuba diving, like anybody else. It's just the position power which I have now at this point, which is completely worthless anywhere if I step out of this door. And you need to be very conscious of that. Some people mix it up and think it's themselves. No way, no way. So, and it's important if it's ripped off and you're not thinking about that, what to do afterwards. And by the way, that's why I love going to the mountains, because nobody cares who you are. Because it's just the competence, if you go skiing if you know the mountain, do you handle the situation well? Nobody could care less of the other people with whom we go on the mountain, because that's a different league. It's a different life. It's a different area. I really enjoyed it. I completely enjoyed it. And to be there also top of the game, and not only,
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting.
So actually, you already are through a part of your life and development, which I still have in front of me, and I'm not sure what to do with that in some years, but I will figure it out.
Yes, you most certainly will.
I hope I stay fit and I can still go to the mountains, because that's the most important thing, is to stay fit, because otherwise what do you do with all your time and your money if you cannot do anything anymore?
Yeah, and you have to remember that you are still the person that you became through all of the things that you managed and the projects you did and the company, how you built it, and the people, how you managed it. And you still have all those skills, and you still are that person. You have
doesn't go away.
Ability. Yeah. And I think that good CEOs are in super high demand, to be honest.
Yeah, but it's really a question, what do you want to do with all that? If you have the luxury of being able to pick, which you usually don't have unless you're born a millionaire.
What would Viktor Frankl do?
Huh?
What would Viktor Frankl do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he found his purpose. He was a psychiatrist, and he was teaching till very old. And I've actually a friend psychiatrist. She's 10 years older than I am, and she was still in his lessons at University of Vienna.
Incredible.
She still enjoyed his lessons in person. Can you imagine?
That's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah, it's great to know that these legends like him, were walked the halls and taught the people that and so on. But one last question. Well, not one last question, but one small question. What is the next small step then for you?
Professionally or mountain-wise?
Your choice.
I think the next small step is a medium step, because I assume the responsibilities corporate-wise of the 2 new countries. And that's very recent. And so I need to figure out how to manage that, really, because nobody gives you a recipe and tells you this is how you now also assume the responsibility of 2 countries. So I'm trying to figure out the target operating model there, really. How can I do that, combining that with my current responsibilities? What are the support functions I need? What is the time? How do I split my time without losing myself and with still being able to take all my vacation? Because I know it's not only that I like to take my vacation, but I need it. It's
Yeah.
something which I truly am convinced, if you work all the time without necessary breaks, you're just not good. You cannot always high perform without any breaks. So that's basically, I need a weekend or a week or whatever in the mountains or skiing, and then I'm good again. And so that's the other thing. And mountain wise, I have this big dream still to go on Mount Vinson. And so that would be something which I really would like. It's horribly expensive, but I when I assumed this role, when I was hired for the role of CEO of Luxembourg, Ballast Luxembourg, at the time I thought, if I do this very demanding executive job, I should promise myself that I pay this. I mean, this is the gift to myself for doing that, because not that is but I thought I might. So this is something I might do. And
it's a way to celebrate
doable.
that.
So that's really something I really would like, because the Antarctica and climb this mountain and the environment and everything, I would really, although I'm really afraid of the cold because I'm easily cold all the time, so it's probably the wrong mountain for me. But
you develop strategies for that too, I'm sure.
I buy a lot of merino clothes and down, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah. My last question for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
I actually would like to be remembered as a funny person, like nice and funny, easygoing to be around with easily, and authentic and inspirational. So if I inspire one or two people in my life, that would be already nice. But funny. I mean, like, the thing is, nothing counts if it's always too deadly serious and you don't have fun in your life, So that it's sad, huh? So if I'm saying funny, I don't mean stupid funny, without any reason, but take life a little bit, from the nice side and the fun side, and take it easy, and then do your stuff, and I think authentic, inspirational, funny, not more than that.
What is in the States, in our cultural language, we talk about the moonshot, with John F. Kennedy saying, we're going to go to the moon. And, that was this incredible goal that we didn't have the technology for and all that. What is the moonshot version of that answer? You said very humbly, inspire one or two people. I'm sure you've inspired way more than one or two women. I mean, I know for a fact that you've inspired more than one or two women, because I know more than one or two women that have been inspired by you. So pretend for a moment that you're this overconfident man saying you can do the project that you only have half the experience for. Maybe that's the mindset.
Falling in the women's trap again. Huh? Now, look, I think if I want to be remembered, you probably don't know, but I come from a very humble background. I grew up in the public housing of Vienna, which is not typically for the very rich. In my generation, it wasn't even for the poor either. But I mean, I had a really good upbringing, but we were not rich, and I didn't have any support in terms of my parents supported me super. But they didn't have the connections, to provide a job, to get you a good job. And in Austria, as you know, everything's about connections. It's now a little bit less pronounced than it was 50 years or 40 years ago. So it was really, I mean, either you knew somebody or you didn't get a job. There's a reason why I'm abroad. And I have to say, I'm really proud from where I come from. I mean, I was always empowered by my parents. They always said, you can do everything, you're great, and so on, but no money, no connections. I mean, basically. And I have to say, where I come from, I would have never imagined that this is possible, that I get there where I am, that I lived in so many countries, that I did what I did, that I earn what I do, but that I'm a CEO, that I know the people I know. I speak 5 languages. I financed myself 2 master's degrees and a doctorate. via student loans, student scholarships. Everything was financed. I had never any money of anything. I worked since I was 14 years old. My first job was at McDonald's with 17, where I financed my scuba diving course. So it's all self-made. There is no shortcut. In my life, no shortcut. Never, ever. And as a foreigner, as a woman foreigner in Switzerland, to become this first female CEO with a P&L responsibility in the biggest insurance, that's not a thing which comes from nothing. So yes, that would be the male version, plus the mountaineering, plus the Ironman, plus 20 marathons, plus the traveling in nearly 100 countries, and then getting to know Steve House.
Oh, come on.
Well, I know people in the mountaineering world. That's not automatic for a CEO of an insurance company.
Yeah.
To trek twice with Reinhard Messner around, I once in Nepal, once in Pakistan. When we met the second time was with Peter Haveler. He led me on the Großglockner in a private tour. Could I have imagined that when I was a little kid in Vienna? No way. Yeah. Those were my heroes. And all of a sudden, you're playing in a league you could have never imagined, with no support in terms of, like pistonné, they say in French. It's like pushed vitamin B. That I have to say.
Yeah, you did that. Really you did that. You can be very proud of that. It's very impressive.
Yeah.
I find you very impressive.
Now that you think that and you pushed me to say all those things, I need to say, wow, that's really impressive. So we impress ourselves bilaterally for our stories.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I know it was hard for us to find a time that worked with your schedule. You're very busy. You just went through this merger of these companies and taking on all this responsibility. So thank you so much. I'm super grateful for your time. You're sharing your wisdom, and we're for sure going to help you inspire more people. So thank you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Steve, to have invited me. I'm really proud to be able to have been in your podcast, because I also admire you. So that's a perfect match.
Good. Well, let's go skiing sometime or go climb.
I would love to. If you take me along, I come anytime with a little bit of planning ahead. Obviously.
Yeah, right. Of course. Maybe we get through the merger first, and maybe next year.
Exactly. Okay? Next winter is the target.
Next winter. Okay. Sounds good. We'll do it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
One of the most common questions I get is, how should I get started with training? Well, they say the first step is the hardest, so let's make that easy. We are offering free 4-week samples of our most popular training plans for mountaineering, trail running, climbing, and more. Go to uphillathlete.com/letsgo to sign up for our newsletter, and you will not only get monthly insights on training for uphill athletes, but you'll also get a sample training plan. It's totally free, so why wait? That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO.